Prepare yourselves to uncover one of the most disturbing and meticulously hidden secrets of our society. A topic that the powers behind the scenes don't want you to understand. Because true peace, the kind promised in self-help books and spiritual retreats, is actually a silent trap you desperately need to escape. This video is not for the faint of heart, as we will reveal how the idea that tranquility is an inner state to be cultivated through focusing on the present is, in fact, the most efficient control mechanism ever devised to keep humanity asleep, complacent, and distant from its true power to question and change the system. What would you say if you discovered that the pursuit of the here and now is an elegant escape from the real responsibilities of changing the past and shaping the future? That this obsession with the present moment numbs the necessary anger for revolution and the crucial ambition for progress? Most people live a life of illusion, believing the answer lies within themselves, when in reality, this belief prevents them from seeing the true external chains that oppress them. What shocked me the most, and will shock you, is discovering the historical evidence of how this narrative has been planted for centuries to keep the masses docile. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like right now, because every subscription and like is not just a gesture of support. It's a vote against the algorithm of censorship and disinformation. It's the purest way to tell YouTube that you demand content that challenges the status quo, breaking the bubble of superficial content and ensuring that controversial investigations like this continue reaching you. And I beg you, don't click away. Watch until the very last second, because the final revelation, based on an anonymous source who paid with their life for this information, will not only shock your perception of reality, but will leave you genuinely impacted, questioning everything you believed about freedom and mental control. The truth is about to be revealed. Imagine Marco, a 24-year-old young man who, on the outside, seems to lead an ordinary life in his village surrounded by mountains, but inside, he fights a silent and exhausting battle. His mind is not a peaceful place. It's like a grand hall where thoughts have no doorman. They come and go without permission at any hour, and the worst part is that most of these unwelcome visitors are far from kind. They are, in fact, persistent echoes of things that have already happened. A what-if from a decision made years ago. An embarrassing memory that insists on resurfacing in the middle of the day. A hurt that has never fully healed. These ghosts of the past mingle with a legion of worries about the future, which are even louder. Will he find a good job? Will he be happy? What do others expect from him? This whirlwind of yesterday and tomorrow creates a constant agitation that follows him like a background buzz that never stops. As a result, Marco lives in a state of deep restlessness, a physical sensation that he should be doing something different, yet he doesn't know what. His body is always a little tense, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if perpetually ready for a threat that never actually arrives, because it exists only in his mind. This mental exhaustion is as tiring, or even more so, than a full day of physical labor. It's a fatigue of the soul that a night's sleep cannot repair. In fact, even sleeping becomes a struggle, because when he lies down in the quiet of his room, that's precisely when his thoughts decide to make the most noise, preventing him from truly resting. Gradually, this gray fog of worries dulls the colors of life. He finds himself forgetting how it feels to laugh genuinely, without force, and the lightness he once felt in youth is replaced by an invisible weight. He is present nowhere, because his body may be at the market or talking to a friend, but his mind is always elsewhere, reviewing the past or trying to guess the future, leaving him perpetually tired, restless, and with a distinct sense that something essential for happiness is missing, without realizing that what is missing is simply himself, fully present in his own life. Imagine that amid that constant fatigue that seemed endless, Marco began to hear, here and there, a thread of hope. It wasn't something found in books or advertisements, but rather in the quiet conversations of the elders in the market square, or in the chats of travelers passing through the road. Slowly, like a grain of sand gently carried to the shore by the tide, the story reached him. It spoke of a wise man, now elderly, who had chosen to live in an even more remote village, atop the hills, a place of silence and nature. What fascinated Marco the most was this man's past. They said he had been a highly respected psychologist in the big city, a man who had dedicated his life to understanding the labyrinths of the human mind, and who, through his words, had helped countless people carry their burdens more lightly. Now, away from the hustle and pressure of urban life, he accumulated not wealth but serenity, and occasionally, with a generous heart, he shared some of this wisdom with those who came to his door. Not with the pretense of a guru, but with the simplicity of a grandfather teaching something valuable to his grandchild. For Marco, this was not just a story, it was an answer, an invitation that the universe seemed to be extending to him. The promise that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to calm the inner storm that tormented him so, and this ignited in his heart 100 sparks of curiosity and an immense desire to try. The decision was not a sudden spark, but rather a fruit that had slowly ripened within him, a need that had finally grown stronger than the fear of change or the comfort of the familiar, even if that familiar was painful. Marco woke up one morning with a clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. He needed to go. The restlessness in his soul was no longer bearable, and the story of the wise man had become a beacon, a tangible possibility of relief he could not ignore. So, with a heart full of hope and the natural butterflies of someone venturing into the unknown, he packed a simple backpack, said his goodbyes quietly, and began the long journey toward the mountains. The path was not easy. There were days of steep climbs that tested his breath, dust on his face, and the scorching sun on his shoulders, nights spent under a starry sky that seemed enormously peaceful in contrast to his inner turmoil. There were moments of doubt, when the familiar voice of anxiety whispered, questioning whether it was worth it, whether the old man even existed, or if he was nothing more than a fool chasing a legend. But with every step he took, moving away from his village, it felt as though he was also symbolically leaving behind some of the weight he carried. The physical journey, with its tangible challenges, became a kind of purification. The tiredness of the body was different from mental exhaustion. It was a clean fatigue, asking only for rest and not consuming him from within. And finally, after one last arduous climb, he caught sight of the simple rooftops of the distant village, nestled serenely among the green hills. In that moment, with aching feet but a spirit lighter than ever, he knew he had made the right decision, and that every step of this journey had been the first part of the healing he so desperately sought, an act of courage that was already beginning to transform him. After a long and exhausting journey, Marco finally found himself in front of the small house covered in green, and his heart, already racing with anticipation, seemed to beat even faster when he spotted the serene figure of the old man sitting on the porch, eyes closed and a face so tranquil it resembled a painting of peace. A stark contrast to everything Marco felt that, for a moment, he hesitated, afraid to disturb that sacred silence. He approached with slow steps, almost barefoot on the dirt ground, feeling the weight of his own restlessness like a visible burden. And when he stopped before the elder, his hands, dirted from the journey, trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the emotion of finally standing before someone who might offer salvation to his troubled soul. He then lowered his head in a gesture of deep respect, and with a voice that was a hoarse whisper, heavy with the fatigue of sleepless days and the anxiety that consumed him, the simple yet powerful words left his lips like a confession. "I want peace in my heart. Can you help me?" In that short sentence lay a world of pain, a cry for help from a castaway no longer able to swim against the current of his own thoughts. It was a scream of vulnerability and, at the same time, an immense act of courage, for Marco was opening the doors to his inner world, exposing his deepest fragility to a stranger, in the fragile yet hopeful belief that within this man with calm eyes and a gentle smile resided the key to the tranquility he so desperately sought. The air around him seemed to pause, waiting for an answer, as he stared at the wise man's face, searching his eyes for any sign of acceptance or refusal. his heart overflowing with a fragile but stubborn hope that his journey had not been in vain. Faced with Marco's sincere and vulnerable request, the wise old man did not offer a long philosophical speech, nor a list of rules to follow. Instead, his calm eyes shone with a deep understanding, as if they perfectly recognized that inner turmoil, and he responded with a simple action, almost disarming in its simplicity. With a gentle gesture, he stood up and invited Marco to follow him to his backyard, a simple place where the air smelled of wet earth and plants. There, he took an ordinary glass and slowly filled it under a small tap, not stopping when the water reached the rim, but continuing with infinite patience, drop by drop, until the water formed a tensioned surface, a delicate convex arc above the container. A test of balance where any sudden movement, a simple tremor in the hands, or a deeper breath would be enough to break the surface tension and make the water overflow. Then, with steady hands, he handed that small, unstable universe to Marco and proposed the seemingly mundane task. Walk from there to the village entrance and return the same way, with one absolute condition: not to spill a single drop of that water. For Marco, at first, the proposal might have sounded strange, perhaps even a little disappointing, as he expected magical words or complex advice, not a challenge that seemed more suitable for a child. Yet there was an undeniable serenity and intentionality in the old man's gaze, conveying the silent confidence that this seemingly insignificant action held a profound secret, a key that unlocked the door to the peace he so desperately sought. And so, with a mix of curiosity and a willingness to trust the process, Marco accepted the glass, feeling both the real and symbolic weight of that water on the verge of spilling, and focused all his attention on the task, understanding, even if only intuitively, that this walk through the village would, in fact, be the first and most important lesson of his journey toward tranquility. The moment his hands, firm yet cautious, received the glass filled to the brim, Marco's outer world began to blur in an extraordinary way. The task, which might have seemed trivial at first glance, instantly transformed into the most important endeavor of his life, a full exercise of presence demanding every fiber of his being. His eyes, once darting with an anxiety that made him look at everything without truly seeing, fixed on the taut surface of the water, that trembling liquid membrane reflecting the sky, held intact only by his absolute care. Every step he took was calculated not with thought, but with deep bodily intuition. His foot settling softly on the earthen ground, his knee flexing to absorb the impact, his torso standing erect and stable like a pillar. The sounds of the village, the joyful shouts of children, the distant bark of a dog, a vendor's call, that once would have triggered an endless chain of anxious thoughts, now reached his ears as muffled, distant echoes, as if he were inside a bubble of silence he had created through his concentration. It was not forced ignorance, but a natural choice of his mind, which for the first time had a clear and present focal point to direct all its energy. The restlessness that had lived in his chest for years quieted, not because it had vanished, but because there was no space for it. All his attention was occupied with the here and now of the glass, the path ahead, the precise movement of his body. The mind, finally, was at peace, not by being empty, but by being fully engaged with a single thing, in the present moment. And in that state of flow, where there was no past to dwell on nor future to fear, only deliberate present action, Marco completed the journey, and upon returning to the wise man, with the glass still intact, he carried with him far more than water. He carried the living proof that tranquility was possible, a lesson he had experienced firsthand before fully comprehending it with reason. After completing that path with a success that filled his chest with a quiet pride, Marco returned to the wise man with a slight smile of relief on his lips, handing over the glass intact as tangible proof of his focus, perhaps expecting a compliment or acknowledgement for the precision with which he had executed the task. However, the old man, with his infinite wisdom expressed through simple gestures, received the glass with the same serenity with which it had been handed over. And instead of commenting on the preserved water, he looked at Marco with a deeply kind gaze and asked a question that, at first glance, seemed completely disconnected and surprising. But tell me, young man, while you were on your way, did you see the children playing happily near the fountain? Or did you hear the persistent barking of the dogs further down the street? This simple question echoed in Marco's mind like a bell, instantly revealing itself to be far deeper than it appeared. At first impulse, he began to shake his head, wanting to explain that no, he hadn't seen or heard any of that, because his focus had to be total on the water, as that was the requirement. But as he mentally formulated this response, a light began to dawn in his understanding. The wise man's question was not a trap or a memory test. It was the very essence of the lesson being presented delicately. It was as if the old man were saying, without using complicated words, "Notice where your attention was." It was so completely immersed in the present, in the here and now of this single task, that external disturbances, which would normally fuel your anxiety, simply ceased to exist for your conscious perception. In that moment, Marco not only heard the question, but began to feel its true meaning, understanding that the goal was not merely to avoid spilling the water, but to experience the state of mind that such total concentration produced. A quiet, focused, and ultimately peaceful mind. The question was the thread that unraveled the ball of yarn, leading him to realize that the key was not in the glass, but in the state of presence that the task demanded. A state where there is no room for the noise of the past or the anxiety of the future, because all awareness is fully engaged in living the moment as it unfolds. When asked by the wise man about the children and the dogs, Marco's first reaction was a brief moment of surprise, his wide eyes betraying that the question was the last thing he expected to hear in that quiet moment of celebration for a task well done. He then opened his mouth to respond, and the sentence that came out was simple, almost naive, imbued with transparent sincerity. "No, sir, I didn't notice anything." But as these words echoed in the tranquil air of the backyard, a much deeper process began to unfold within him. By verbalizing this truth, that his entire universe had been reduced to that glass, to that water, to the precarious balance of each step, it was as if he himself were hearing the key that unlocks a great secret. His answer was not merely a denial. It was a powerful, involuntary confession of a state of mind he had never experienced before. He realized, with a clarity that cut like a blade, that the reason he hadn't noticed the external disturbances was not a flaw in his hearing, but because his mind, for the first time in years, was not wandering aimlessly between past and future. It was fully anchored, fully engaged, and entirely present in the moment, in a single action. By saying, "My focus was entirely on the glass of water," Marco was not merely describing a concentration technique. He was defining, without fully understanding the depth, the very essence of inner peace. It was an admission that when attention is fully committed to the now, the ghosts of past regrets and the monsters of future anxieties simply lose their power. They have no space to manifest because consciousness is entirely dedicated to living fully and completely what is happening. His simple answer, therefore, became the bridge connecting practical experience, the careful walk, to the deeper philosophical understanding the wise man sought to convey. It was in the act of confessing his temporary blindness and deafness to the outside world that Marco truly began to see and hear himself, discovering that peace is not a destination to be reached, but a state of presence cultivated moment by moment. A state he had unknowingly just experienced in its purest form. Faced with Marco's simple yet profoundly truthful response, the wise elder nodded with a smile that was both approving and deeply satisfied, as if witnessing a seed he had planted long ago finally sprouting. His eyes, full of ancient kindness, locked onto Marco's, and he began to explain, in a soft, melodious voice that was as soothing as a fresh breeze, the secret now revealed, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived experience. He said that the peace Marco had been seeking, which he had felt for a few precious minutes during the walk, is not something found outside, like a hidden treasure or a magical formula, but rather a natural state of mind that arises spontaneously when we bring it to the only place where life truly happens, the present moment. He explained that our inner turmoil, the storm of thoughts that had so troubled Marco, is fueled precisely when we allow our attention to wander into the past, ruminating over choices and moments that are gone and cannot be changed, or when we project it into an uncertain future, creating worries and fear-based scenarios that do not even exist. However, when the mind is invited, through a simple and concrete task, to focus entirely on the here and now, whether on the breath, a sound, or the precise balance of a glass of water, it finds a point of support, an anchor. And in this state of full presence, there is simply no mental space for anxious thoughts to take hold. It is as if the mind, fully engaged with immediate reality, becomes full of the present, and the ghosts of the past and future lose their power, remaining outside this sphere of attention. The great revelation, therefore, was that peace was already within him. It was his essential nature, but had been obscured by constant mental noise. And the key to accessing it was not to fight the thoughts, but gently train the mind to inhabit the now, just as he had unknowingly done throughout the journey, discovering a calm that was both the lesson and the reward. At that exact moment, under the serene gaze of the wise man, a profound and transformative understanding illuminated Marco's heart. Not like a sudden lightning strike, but like the sunrise that gently dispels the fog, revealing a landscape that had always been there, yet he had never truly seen. He realized that he had embarked on a long and exhausting journey outward, naively believing that peace was an object that could be given by someone else, a secret kept in some distant place, when in reality, the entire outward journey had been merely a means to bring him back to his own interior. The true discovery was neither in the village nor in the old man's words, but in the lived, bodily experience of walking with that cup. In those minutes of absolute focus, he had not gained anything new, but rather had stopped doing something. He had stopped fleeing from the present. The restlessness that consumed him was not an invincible monster, but the natural fruit of a mind that, like a boat without an anchor, was carried everywhere by the currents of past and future. The key, he now understood, was surprisingly simple, though it required practice. It was learning to voluntarily bring the anchor of attention to the now, to the simple and undeniable reality of the present moment, to the feeling of feet on the ground, to the rhythm of the breath, to the task at hand. Keeping the mind in the present was not an exhausting battle against thoughts, but a gentle act of redirection, a choice to fully inhabit the immediate reality, where there is simply no room for anxiety because it exists only in imaginary territory. Marco understood, with a relief that was almost physical, that peace had never been lost. It had always been within him, silently waiting for him to cease the search outward and simply sit, in quiet, at the center of his own being, in the only moment that truly belonged to him, the present. And this revelation was not an end, but the true beginning of a new way of living. Empty your mind of everything you thought you knew, because the revelations we're sharing here today are just the tip of the iceberg of a much deeper and more disturbing knowledge. If this video made you question even one certainty you held, then it has accomplished its mission. Now, I need you to be part of this investigation. Hit the like button, because this gesture is crucial for YouTube's algorithm to understand that content like this deserves to be recommended, and that we are building a community of critical minds here. And even more importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Every new subscription is not just a number. It's a sign that more awakened people exist, and it gives us the strength and resources to keep digging where they don't want us to go. In the comments, I want to know everything. What point shocked you the most? What will you rethink starting today? This exchange is the most vital part of the entire process. And now, get ready for the next step. The video appearing on your screen right now is, without a doubt, the most impactful and terrifying investigation we've ever conducted. It connects everything we've talked about here to a much larger and more sinister conspiracy. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. It's even more gripping and captivating than this one. The truth awaits you on the other side. Don't get left behind.